Hey everyone, welcome to the Troy Christian High School Chapel Podcast. At the end of this episode, please take a moment to subscribe to our Chapel YouTube channel and follow our Chapel Instagram account. Those two places will be the easiest way to check out what's coming up, as well as find some bonus content from our speakers and worship team. Most importantly, I hope the following message challenges and encourages you to grow in your relationship with God as you learn to love God and love others better. Enjoy. Welcome to Troy Christian High School's podcast. This week we have Mrs. Lydia Rowe. She is one of our junior high, she is the junior high girls Bible teacher here. Yes. You're in your second year here at Troy Christian. And you just spoke in chapel this past week, and you finished up our series on focus. And specifically, you went into this idea of unity, of us as a body being together in our focus. Leaning into the strength that we have when we are living our faith as a body and not as individuals. And so I want to jump into that. But first, before we get into that, you have led worship for us. You've led worship a lot around the area, I know, as well. When we did the whole lockdown, going virtual, remote, you and your family held down worship for us remotely, and that was so such a gift. It was such a gift.
It was a gift for us too.
So we were so thankful.
My kids do it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it was so great.
And then so I'm helping over at the elementary chapel stuff, and I see Nathan, right, coming up, and he's just got this energy and passion when he gets up there and lead, and it's just it is awesome. It's so cool to see.
It exudes out of him.
It really does. It really does. We love seeing it. Have you always been into worship? Has this been what's that journey look like for you? Mm-hmm. Did you went to Troy Christian? Did you go to Troy Christian elementary?
I went to Troy Christian. I was homeschooled up until 6th grade, and I went to Troy Christian in 6th, 7th, and 8th.
Oh, okay.
And it was before there was a high school. So after 8th grade, I graduated and went to Tip City High School.
Okay.
And no, worship, I've always enjoyed worship, and music has always been a part. Ever since I was 3 years old, I've been writing and singing, and I would make up little songs and raps, and
Wait, you rap?
Oh yeah. And,
this
DC
might
Talk
have to come out later.
It was really good. I probably could pull out some things for you.
That's awesome.
No, but music was always a huge part, and I grew up in the 80s, 90s, and yet most of the music that we listened to was this contemporary Christian. So I know the 80s and 90s, like Micah W. Smith, Amy Grant. Those were my people. DC Talk, and I thought I was going to be Amy Grant. Loved her, but I definitely was wanting to pursue that, and felt that call on my life. But when I would think about worship and music in worship, and even Christian music, I wanted to reach the world, and I felt like that was for the church. That was that's good, that's building up the church, but how am I going to, I want to reach the world. So I was thinking, okay, I'll be this pop artist, but then I'll go and speak at schools, and I'll have this platform that people will listen to because I'm this singer. So it was always for a purpose. It was always because I wanted to speak to teenagers, really. I would go into schools and teach on abstinence and just education and stuff. That's part of what I did during our high school ministry time, but I've always been passionate about students and really them figuring out their identity. Yeah. And I feel like music pulls on that so much. I grew so much through music. I interacted a lot with music and just listened a lot, and it just meant so much to me that I felt like that was kind of my ticket in to be able to have a platform to speak into people's lives. Okay. So that's kind of where I was coming from when I got into recording industry. I wanted to learn about the music business. That's what I went to school for. Okay. Majored in recording industry, music business, and so learned about copyright law and all of those things. Thinking not necessarily that I wanted to be in the business, but that I wanted to know the business, so that when I did the songwriting thing or the singing thing, that I would know what I was getting into. But while I was there at school, anytime that there would be an open door to perform, to pursue that, it was just, and there was so many, it was Nashville.
Oh, sure.
There's so many opportunities. I felt such a red light on that from the Lord. Like, I just felt like he was saying, no. Mm-hmm. So I just kind of like put that dream on the back burner. I was just like, okay, I don't know why you're saying no to all this. Why did you say yes to coming here and doing this, but no to, what am I doing here then?
Yeah.
So it wasn't until kind of later that God kind of showed me a whole new picture of what worship is. I think like I said, I always thought of it as building up the body. And he was like, think about the times that you have heard my voice the clearest.
Yeah.
Think about the times that I've been able to give you marching orders, like to tell you what to do. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's totally in worship.
Yeah.
And he's like, so if I can, basically he's been speaking to me like ever since I was little about being a worship leader, but I've kind of just been pushing it aside because I didn't see the value. And I realized, oh my goodness, like if I can help connect people to hearing him, that changes the world.
That's it.
Because then all of those people who are connected to him, like it's not me, like it's him. Like you connect them to him, and then they're going to hear him, and then they're going to go off and they're going to change the world. They're going to do their parts.
Yeah.
Even what we were talking about in chapel, like they're going to discover what their part is, and they're going to play that part. So
yeah. Oh, that's so awesome. And what a perspective change. I think so many times that the music side of worship, especially in churches, gets treated as like, well, this is just preparing us for the sermon.
Yeah.
Rather than recognizing like, this is like where God speaks a lot of times, and to hear that, that's so helpful.
Yeah.
I hear you, just in our meetings and different times, even in chapel, and I've noticed this. You have a sensitivity to God's voice that, it's like you're just saying, here I am in Nashville and I've got these opportunities, but I'm like sensing these red lights.
Yeah.
What is that? Like, what is that? I know that's like, how do you put that into words? But is that like still quiet voice inside that you've got this like tension that you're wrestling with, or is it something else? Or
yeah, I think the still small voice is probably a good way to describe it. It's kind of been built up over a history of building trust with the Lord, where, he'll tell me something, either not to do something or to do something. And the times when maybe I have been disobedient and I realize, like later, this is why he actually told me that. You kind of learn the hard way.
Yeah.
But then really most of the time for me, it's been, okay, this is what I think you're saying. So I'm going to go with what I think you're saying. And then find, that it is either through confirmation or through just like seeing later why. But just kind of building that trust of being like, I think there was a really long time where I really didn't trust that I could hear him. It was actually a really, really big deal in my life. I was constantly afraid that I was going to miss his voice. All I want is to do what he wants,
Yeah.
And I'm just like, how can I don't want to get in the way with my desires and what I want. And so it took a while to realize, and just through different things, that God was just like, I made you the way that I made you. I know your brain. I know how you process information, and I will write it in the sky if I have to. If you're open to me, I will speak to you. And so just trusting that he does and that he is.
Yeah.
And,
When you expect it and you're looking for it, it's a lot easier to catch that. That's so good. This past week in chapel, the picture that God gave you, that you communicated to us, is the body. This is such a powerful picture and metaphor.
Yeah.
You talked about this, the pieces of the piano, and kind of in this community, all seeing each other and really separating themselves from each other. And it creates conflict and tension. And then the piano is not operating like it was created to operate.
Right.
And I just, there was so many things. I know with like 15, 20 minutes, it's so hard to unpack all those. And I just kind of wanted to get some of your perspective on why do you think our first inclination is when we see somebody that has something that's different than us? Mm-hmm. Why do you think our first inclination is that us versus them? That it immediately, it's almost like we see them as a threat,
right?
Rather than, oh wow, that's unique, that's different. Like, I wonder how I can connect with them. You know, it's like it is very much like it's like this defense mechanism almost that kicks up immediately, and you see it everywhere. So why do you have some thoughts on like why do you think that's our first inclination when we see the uniqueness of someone else rather than celebrating it? We feel threatened.
Oh man, there's so much depth to that question, and so many different places you could go. But just to really get down to simplify it, I think it goes back straight to the fall.
Yeah.
And straight to questioning your identity. I mean, you know, when Satan came in the garden and he was, of course, trying to get them to question who God is and his character, and that's huge, and that's a big one. But then also trying to get them to want something they already had. Like you can be like God.
Yeah.
They were like God.
Yeah.
And I think that is embedded, that Satan is, he uses the same tactics because they work. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we've just kind of bought into, a lot of us have just bought into that. And so it's just kind of embedded in culture to look at each other and compare and to base our value on how we stack up next to each other.
Yeah.
And yet God's just been showing me more and more about how completely opposite that is to how he wired us. Mm-hmm. Just the ridiculousness of it in the metaphor with the piano. But then also, like, there was this one time that I was watching a sunset and I was thinking, man, this is so beautiful. So amazing. And God just put it in my heart. He was like, would you ever compare yourself to a sunset? And just thinking about like the ridiculousness of this unique, amazing thing. And that we would never do that. And yet when we look at each other and we see something good or beautiful in someone else, instead of thinking, oh, wow, God, that's amazing. Mm-hmm. I can't believe you did that in her. I'm like, why didn't you do that in me? Why can't I be like that? Why you feel like you're lacking something instead of being excited for what God did in them and gave them. Right. Because that's really part of you. It's part of, so. Yeah.
Oh, that's huge. And even just to begin thinking about how many things that we see that are honestly in many respects way more magnificent than us in their view. Mm-hmm. And we don't default to comparing ourselves to it. You know, you bring up the sunset. I think of how many times I've just been out in nature and just like, wow, this is incredible. And I've never once have I thought like, just
how ridiculous that would be.
Why don't I have that? Right.
Why am I not the wind?
And I'm not threatened by it. It's literally just like, wow, this is you just go to a place of joy and enjoyment of that. Yeah, I think I'm reminded of Donald Miller in one of his kind of memoir books, Searching for God Knows What. He brings it back to the fall with that. And one of the things he says is in Moses' writing after the fall, he brings up nudity over and over and over again as like they realized their nakedness. Just to point out that like when you're naked, there's always this there's this kind of, there's an awareness of it. There's this shame. There's this, kind of insecurity that creeps in. And he's basically saying that Moses was drawing out this idea that before the fall, we had our security, we had our significance, we had our meaning locked into our relationship with God. When that was broken, that all went away. And ever since, we've been pining for it in anything we can find. So everything feels like a threat.
Yeah.
Especially as it relates to like what I could have or should have versus
Right.
what I don't. Yeah.
And I feel like too, like, because we feel threatened, we don't see our connections. The power that is the church, that is the body of Christ, it neutralizes us.
Right.
And so it's a good strategy. You can see.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when you start to look around, you see during chapel, they sang a song, Break Every Chain, and part of it talks about there's an army rising up. And it was just even in that moment that I was like, I've seen this before in prayer. I've seen this army rising up. I've seen this, and what it's us waking up to the fact that we are an army, that we have a lot of power because he gave it to us. He had all the authority. He gave it to us, but he didn't give it to us individually.
Right.
Gave it to us
collectively.
Yeah. And so if we're all, I mean, we can be as powerful and there are very powerful people individually, and that's great. But until we figure out how to do this together, the world's not going to see it because we're not really being the body of Christ.
Yeah, absolutely. There's, you mentioned, actually, you have this passion for people with our identity. And I think that's part of what this really is what it stems from, is like when you don't know how you were created, why you were created, it's even harder to find out how you fit in to the bigger picture of it. What are some advice that you give people to, like, in that process of understanding their identity, okay, am I a key, a string, a sustain pedal? Like, what am I?
Yeah.
What are some steps for people just to kind of like go through a process of trying to figure that piece out?
I don't know if I necessarily have like a step-by-step. I think that's one of the reasons why I talk about and I go towards hearing God's voice a lot, because I really believe that he is the only one who can tell you that. And he's the only one that can define that. And I think sometimes you can't even hear him define you until you can learn to discern that voice. So I think a great place to start is the black and white place, the Bible.
Yeah. Because
that's his voice on paper. And those are things that you can, there's actually quite a few scriptures that say that this is who you are. And so to start actually believing what's in that black and white, like believing that. And then as you start to believe that and get that into you, then you can start hearing his voice more clearly.
Yeah.
For the more specific, because it's not, you're not going to read in the Bible that you're a string or that you're a pin or whatever piece you are.
Yeah.
But you will see the foundation laid as to who you are and how he wired you and how he made you. And then you can listen for that voice as he starts speaking to you through his word, through somebody speaking, through something that happens in your life. I remember I had heard the story of Lazarus a bunch of times. But there's this one time I was reading it and I noticed when Martha, Lazarus is coming out of the grave and Martha's like, Lord, he stinks. And in that moment, I'm reading that, and in that moment, Jesus whispers to me and he says, you're like her.
Oh, wow.
And he was like, and she gets a bad rap, but I love her, and I loved her then. And you're like that. You notice the obvious things. You state you notice the things that like no one else wants to say, but like is obvious.
Yeah.
And it's like, why isn't anyone else talking about this?
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel out of place or, weird for doing that. And yet just to hear the Lord say, I actually love that about you. And I loved it about her. And just to see like, he loves those individual pieces. He loves how people are wired. He made me to observe that and to look at things that way.
Yeah.
And that's good. And that just kind of helped give me just a security in who I am. Like other people might see things differently or notice different things, but that's because he wired them that way too.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's awesome. Well, Lydia, thank you so much for sharing with us in chapel, but also in here. There's so much more that we can unpack with that, sure. But that's so helpful to kind of get into that a little bit. Thank you for serving as a Bible teacher and just that critical role of growing our young people in their faith. And so we appreciate it. thanks for joining us on the podcast, and continue to check back here. We've got Terrell Carter coming up in chapel over the next couple weeks, and we're going to try to get him on the podcast as well. So we'll be looking forward to that coming up. So thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.